Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation to get others to question their own beliefs and their sense of reality. In the wake of the brutal massacre by Hamas on October 7th, 2023, and the global tidal wave of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, condemnation of Israel, and support for Hamas that was unleashed, many Jewish people have reported feelings of being gaslighted. There are many things that have fed into this. For example, there's been a widespread questioning and diminishing of the atrocities of October 7th. This has included the denial of killing babies and raping women, as well as blaming Israel for whatever casualties occurred. As well, insisting that calls for the destruction of the world's only Jewish state, from the river to the sea, is not anti-Semitic. That's what Jewish people are told all the time. It's not anti-Semitic to advocate for the destruction of the state of Israel. It's only anti-Zionist. And so when we get this idea thrown at us constantly, many people begin to question themselves. And then denouncing Israel has become extremely widespread and popular. And over-the-top hostility has become normalized. It's become very normalized to hear and to see and to witness the incredible onslaught of vicious criticism and attacks against Israel. And this has included Israel being raked over the coals by many news platforms and pundits throughout the world, massive and widespread campus protests and demonstrations on city streets globally, Israel being repeatedly condemned and censured by the United Nations, the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes, the highly publicized case brought against Israel in the International Court of Justice by South Africa for war crimes, the huge popularity of wearing a keffiyeh as a symbol of identifying with the Palestinian cause. A debate 2 weeks ago at the Oxford Union, one of the world's most prestigious debating societies, which voted 278 to 59 to overwhelmingly support the motion that Israel is an apartheid state responsible for genocide. Numerous entertainment stars and social media influencers have been critical of Israel and supportive of the Palestinian cause. These include, among many others, Ariana Grande, Billie Eilish, Dave Chappelle, Dave Beckham, Liam Neeson, Michael Stipe, Susan Sarandon, Angelina Jolie, and dozens of others. And we know that these people, because they're so popular and famous, they have a massive influence and impact on the rest of the population, on everyone else. And there are a plethora of political leaders in the world who engage regularly in slamming Israel or demanding that they cease to defend themselves. With this widespread and non-stop condemnation of Israel, it's hard for many people to escape wondering if perhaps these people have a point and Israel is the guilty party. This deluge of opposition is indeed a very effective form of gaslighting. If the entire world is against Israel, Can they all be wrong? Asher Ginsburg was a famous Hebrew journalist and essayist and one of the most important pre-state Zionist thinkers. He's best known by his pen name, Achad Ha'am. And in 1892, he wrote an essay entitled Chatzi Nechama, half a consolation, where he discusses what he says are the positive, if you will, the positive benefits of the ancient blood libel. Why did he find consolation in the widespread and perennial accusation that Jewish people use the blood of non-Jews, usually non-Jewish children, in order to bake our matzah for Passover? And he explained that since literally every Jew on the planet knows that this widely held accusation is totally false, the blood libel then demonstrates, according to Achad Ha'am, it demonstrates to Jews who might otherwise be susceptible to internalizing the widespread beliefs of their enemies that yes, it is possible for the entire world to be wrong and for the Jewish people to be right. Before we address the big lies that are being hurled endlessly at Israel, I wanted to reiterate something that we mentioned previously, and that is that when the enemies of Israel accuse her of the most heinous things, they are often engaging in projecting onto Israel some of their own faults. Or as the old saying goes, when you point your finger at someone, you have 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. Let's mention a few examples of this. Number 1, Palestinian Arabs maintain that they experienced a Nakba, or a catastrophe, in 1948, when the Jews allegedly forced them out of their homes, 600,000 of them, forced out of their homes by the Jews who confiscated their property. As we mentioned last week, this is a complete fiction. The vast majority of Arabs left on their own in 1948, or they left at the urging of their leaders, who said, you can leave your homes until we wipe out the Jews, and then you can return. These people were not kicked out en masse by the Jewish people, with Jewish people confiscating their property. Simply not true. However, it is true that 850,000 Jews were forced to flee their homes, where they had been living for centuries in Arab countries, and they had to leave their possessions behind. Number 2, Palestinians assert that Israel is seeking to wipe them out in a program of genocide. As we'll soon discuss, there is not a shred of evidence to support this claim. However, Palestinian Arab leadership has not only called for the genocide of the Jewish people, they have sought to carry it out. They have acted on this threat. And the same holds true for some of Israel's Arab neighbors, not just the Palestinian Arabs, but some of the countries that surround Israel have been subjected to calls for genocide and attempts at genocide. 1948 and 1967 and 1973, the Arab nations that attacked Israel essentially were calling for a genocide, for us to be thrown into the sea. So not only were they preaching this, they planned to do it and they acted out on their plans. For example, in the 20th century, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, on a radio broadcast said, "Arabs, rise up as one man and kill the Jews wherever you find them. This pleases Allah, history, and religion, and this saves your honor." Now, this aspiration was continued by Husseini's protege, Yasser Arafat, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the latter part of the 20th century. And now, with Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group in Gaza in the 21st century, it's the same old song. The original charter of Hamas calls for the annihilation of Jewish people. And in 2019, senior Hamas official Fatih Hamad said the following: "Our brothers in the diaspora are still preparing. A long time has passed with you warming up. All of you, 7 million Palestinians abroad, enough of the warming up. You have Jews everywhere, and we must attack every Jew on the globe by way of slaughter and killing. Enough of the warming up." And Hamas has openly declared that they will carry out many more October 7ths if given the opportunity. So while they accuse Israel of genocide, their fingers point back at themselves. They openly call for the genocide of Jews, and they have tried to carry it out. Number three, one of the major charges against Israel is that we are settler colonialists. This is certainly a rich accusation to be made by Islamic Arabs. As we discussed in our second lecture, Jews are indigenous to Israel and first came into the land 4,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, Jews were an independent nation under the reign of King David, which continued for hundreds of years under his descendants. And even after losing our independence, there has always been a continuous presence of Jews living in the land. How did as Islamic Arabs come into the area? Arabic Muslims swept into the Levant in the 7th century and conquered it. Not long afterward, they built a large mosque on the site where the Jewish Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem. So who really are the colonialists? Number 4, one of the most common slanders against Israel is that it is a racist apartheid state. We'll soon be addressing this accusation. But for now, let's just ask how Jews and Israelis fare in Palestinian-controlled areas and in Arab and Islamic countries. Well, the Palestinian Authority explicitly bans Jews from living in areas under its control. The sale of land to Jews by Palestinians is punishable by death. So Jews cannot own property or reside in areas controlled by the PA, by the Palestinian Authority. Jews have severely restricted access to their religious sites in territory controlled by the Palestinian Authority, such as the tomb of Joseph in Nablus. In fact, the entire area under the control of the Palestinian Authority is essentially off limits to Jews and Israelis. The Palestinian Authority engages in denying the historical connection of Jews to the land of Israel and to important religious sites, such as the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, and claiming that there was never a Jewish holy temple in Jerusalem. This is the policy of the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian law prevents trade or collaboration with Jewish-owned businesses. So Jewish economic activity is excluded in PA-controlled areas. As well, Palestinian Authority-controlled media, education, and religious systems promote anti-Semitic and anti-Israel propaganda. For example, Palestinian Authority television broadcast a sermon by Sheikh Ibrahim Muderis on May 13th, 2005, where he preached that, quote, Jews are the cancer spreading all over the world. The Jews are a virus like AIDS hitting humankind. Jews are responsible for all wars and conflicts. Or a speech by Dr. Nasser Al-Yafawi, director at the Ministry of Education in Gaza, who posted the following on Facebook on October 9th, 2020. He wrote, on their holy feasts, especially Passover, crunchy bread is eaten, and the crime is that this bread is not kneaded unless it is kneaded with the blood of a non-Jew. Now, we could provide many more examples, but in any discussion of the terrible accusations leveled at Israel, we have to keep in mind the Talmudic teaching from Tractate Kiddushin 70a, where the sages said, Kol ha-posel b'mumo posel, that those who seek to invalidate others pick on their own foibles and project them onto the other, meaning they seek to invalidate others with their own shortcomings. And we will see this in all of the terrible accusations that are leveled at the Jewish people and at Israel by our opponents. So now let's return to the litany of lies hurled at Israel and to defuse them. We'll begin with one of the most central issues, which is the subject of a recent book by Adam Kirsch entitled On Settler Colonialism. In fact, this has not only been a regularly heard way of trying to characterize the state of Israel. For many academics and activists, describing Israel as a settler colonial state was considered sufficient justification for Hamas's barbaric attack on October 7th, 2023. Normally, colonialism is associated with things like European empires who invaded lands in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, implanting their own citizens in colonies by force, subjugating the native and indigenous populations, and exploiting and stealing the natural resources. Now, we already discussed in our second lecture why this has nothing to do with Jewish people and the modern state of Israel. We did not come as Johnny-come-latelys to the land of Israel. As we discussed in great detail, Jewish people have been there uninterruptedly for over 3,000 years. We're indigenous to the land of Israel. But now I would like to reinforce some of those points that we previously made and add some other details. Professor Alan Dershowitz has correctly pointed out that claiming that the Jewish refugees who immigrated to Palestine in the last decades of the 19th century, to claim that they were the tools of European imperialism, that claim falls apart when the accusers have to answer the simple question, for whom were these socialist and idealist refugees working? Who were they coming for? Who were they the agents of? Were they planting the flag of the Tsar of Russia? Or were they planting the flag of the anti-Semitic regimes of Poland or Lithuania? Of course, Dershowitz points out that these desperate refugees wanted absolutely nothing to do with the countries from which they fled. They fled to avoid pogroms and religious discrimination. They didn't come to Palestine with any of the weapons of imperialism. They didn't come with arms or with other means of conquest. Their tools were rakes and hoes. And the land that they cultivated was not taken away from its rightful owners by force or confiscated by colonial law. The land was purchased primarily from absentee landlords and real estate speculators, often at exorbitant prices. And the land they sought to cultivate was not rich in natural resources such as oil or gold. That's why colonialists come. The land was materially worthless. It was a worthless piece of real estate in a backwater of the world whose significance to the Jews was religious, historical, and familial. Bernard-Henri Lévy, famous contemporary French philosopher, in his recent book Israel Alone, notes that in 1947, when the United Nations proposed dividing the land that was left from mandatory Palestine after Britain took 77% of it, 77% of the land that was supposed to be part of the Jewish state, and gave it to create another Arab state, Transjordan. And in 1947, when the UN now proposed to divide that small part that was now left over for Israel, the Jews at the time of this new UN partition plan made up 1/3 of the territory to be divided, meaning that the United Nations was going to divide a small part into two nations now, a state for the Jews and a state for the Palestinians. And the Jews at that time made up 1/3 of the entire area that was going to be divided, and we made up 1/2 of the territory that was going to be designated for the state of Israel. There were a lot of Jews there. So when the dispute about two nations began, there were as many Jews as Arabs on the land that were now told had a colonial state being formed. Does that make any sense? Of course, another major difference between Israel and actual colonial settler lands is that the Jewish state is the only one to have been voted into existence by the international community. The League of Nations mandate for Palestine, the San Remo Conference, which enshrined the Balfour Declaration in international law, and the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947 that was voted on and approved by the United Nations totally refutes the vicious claim that the Jewish state is an illegitimate child of European interlopers. Finally, we must never forget that Jews have lived continuously on the land of Israel for over 3,000 years, as I mentioned. We are the only nation on earth who speaks the same language, practices the same religion, and lives by the same holy book that we practiced 3,000 years ago. And even when Jews were exiled from their land, they have always prayed, each day facing Jerusalem, and have always longed to return to our historical homeland. We left in body, we did not leave in spirit. And the ongoing return of Jewish people that started in earnest, as I mentioned in one of our earlier lectures, there were always Jews in the 11th century, in the 12th century, in the 13th century, in the 14th century. Always Jews who trickled back to the land of Israel. But the ongoing return of Jewish people that started in earnest in 1880 was clearly not a settler colonial project. It was rather an amazing story of indigenous people returning to their historical homeland. Now, the war in Gaza that was sparked by Hamas's genocidal attack on southern Israel last year has been raging now for 15 months. While the number of Gazan casualties is no doubt not as high as the official reports of the Hamas-run health ministry, still thousands of non-combatants have been killed and injured. This, plus the grisly scenes of widespread destruction, have led to a steady drumbeat of the accusation that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. In truth, this charge has been made not only regarding Gaza, but that it has been the policy of Israel vis-a-vis all Palestinians, including those living in the so-called West Bank, for decades. Now, on the face of it, this accusation is patently absurd. Since Israel gained control of Gaza and the West Bank in 1967, the Palestinian Arab population has increased from under 1 million people to over 5 million people today. We really have had a plan and a program of genocide against Palestinians when their population numbers quintupled over the years since 1967. Gaza's population exploded from about 70,000 people in 1947 to about 400,000 people in 1967 and about 2.3 million people today. You call this genocide? Now, what is taking place today in Gaza is certainly not genocide. The casualties there among non-combatants and the destruction of property are the tragic consequences of a war that Israel did not start and Israel did not want. The term genocide itself was actually first coined to describe the Nazi Holocaust of Jews, which was essentially a plan of extermination, genocide. The systematic murder of 6 million Jews as part of the Nazi plan to eradicate the Jewish people, according to the Geneva Convention, the United Nations, and international law, the crime of genocide requires an intent to destroy in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. It means targeting a specific group because of who they are, rather than what they have done. Because what Israel is doing in Gaza does not meet these criteria. South Africa has not been successful in pressing its case for genocide against Israel. What's going on in Gaza simply does not meet the criteria of genocide. So what has recently happened? Ireland has now joined with South Africa in their case and is now pushing for the definition of genocide to be expanded and broadened so that it will be able to fit Israel in. The reality is that what we're dealing here with is a witch hunt. We're not dealing here with a real concern over whether there's a genocide going on or not going on. We're dealing here with a witch hunt to condemn and to destroy Israel. And if part of that is going to be accomplished by showing that they are committing genocide, then they will accuse us of genocide whether it's true or not, and they will do whatever it takes, whatever means necessary. And if that means fudging the criteria and fudging the definition, so be it. The reality is that the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, are operating against Hamas and not intentionally against the civilian population of Gaza. Israel's military response in Gaza is a necessary and lawful act of self-defense to protect its citizens and to prevent further genocidal attacks by Hamas. It is blatantly obvious that Hamas uses its own civilians as human shields. In this way, they will either curtail Israeli efforts to destroy the military capabilities of Hamas, or Hamas, will be the cause of death and injury to its own citizens. Hamas's war strategy is to do exactly this, to ensure that there will be serious casualties of non-combatants in Gaza in order to bring down international condemnation and pressure on the Israeli Defense Forces to curtail their defensive war against their terrorist army, so that they will live another day and be able to attack Israel's citizens once again. Now, in order to advance this agenda of, again, purposefully and enthusiastically seeking the death and injury of its own citizens, Hamas does two things. Number one, it denies its citizens access to the hundreds of miles of underground tunnels that it built in Gaza, where these people could be safe from the conflict. And number two, Hamas deliberately endangers civilians by embedding itself in the civilian infrastructure of Gaza, storing its weapons and stationing its fighters in homes, in hospitals, in mosques, and in schools. For Hamas, the more civilians that are killed, the better. Throughout the fighting in Gaza, Israel has taken extensive measures to protect civilians. They provide warnings before attacking in civilian areas. They drop thousands and thousands and thousands of leaflets. They text Palestinians on their phones. They make thousands of phone calls to Palestinians. They broadcast radio messages. They fire warning shots on the roof of buildings they're about to bomb. And they take other measures to get civilians out of harm's way. The IDF facilitates evacuations from combat zones, while at the same time, Hamas impedes with this. Israel establishes humanitarian corridors, allows humanitarian pauses from fighting, and facilitates the delivery of humanitarian aid. News organizations have shied away from reporting that much of the fuel and food that comes into Gaza is stolen by Hamas. And this, of course, results in shortages for the civilians. John Spencer is one of the world's foremost experts in urban warfare. He is chair of the Urban Warfare Studies Department at the Modern War Institute at West Point and has written several books on his area of expertise. Spencer has been to Gaza numerous times since the outbreak of the conflict, and he's been able to carefully observe up close what is going on there. He knows that critics of Israel accuse the Jewish state of using disproportionate force in Gaza, resulting in disproportionate casualties. They accuse Israel of indiscriminate bombing and having a campaign to starve civilians. Spencer said he saw none of this, and that Israel doing harm mitigation at a level that no one's ever even tried. Israel is doing harm mitigation at a level that no one has ever tried. Colonel Richard Kemp is the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan and head of the international terrorism team of the British Joint Intelligence Committee. He has also praised the performance of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza. He said that Israel does more to safeguard civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Let me repeat that. Israel does more to safeguard civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. British Major Andrew Fox came to the identical conclusions. And these experts determined that in truth, the ratio of non-combatant civilians killed to the number of actual Hamas terrorist combatants that are killed is again one of the lowest in urban warfare. One of the lowest. Of course, groups like Amnesty International and the United Nations have no problem insisting that Israel is engaged in genocide in Gaza. But in organizations like these, we don't have objective parties who are experts on the topic like Spencer and Kemp. We have here two organizations with long histories of blatant hostility and bias against Israel. Amnesty International, incredibly, has never accused any other nation in the world of genocide in recent years. The only accusation of genocide is leveled against Israel. This alone already tells you a lot. Employees at Amnesty International have rejected their damning report about Israel. They issued a report essentially saying that their findings have revealed that Israel is engaging in genocide. and their own employees at Amnesty International have rejected their report and warned that it was inaccurate and it was motivated by a reflexive hostility to Israel, internal anti-Semitism, and a desire to tell their subscribers exactly what they want to hear rather than the truth. The United Nations has been obsessed with tarring Israel with a genocide rap. We should wonder then why the UN recently refused to renew the contract of Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. This is their expert on the topic of genocide. They refused to renew her contract, Alice Warimu Ndiritu. Why would they refuse to renew her contract? Could it be because she determined that Israel's actions in Gaza could not be defined as genocide? The final canard that we are going to discuss tonight is the accusation that Israel is an apartheid state. The International Criminal Court defines apartheid as the implementation and maintaining a system of legalized segregation in which one racial group is deprived of civil rights. Now, while this was true of South Africa, it is the very opposite of Israel, where all citizens, Jews, Arabs, and others, are all equal under the law. The Arab Muslim population of Israel is about 20% of the total Israeli population. And they enjoy full rights as citizens. They vote, they hold office, they serve in all levels of government, where currently there are 17 Arab lawmakers who are members of the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, and there's an Arab justice who sits on the Supreme Court. Arabs serve in the police and in the army. They work as lawyers, and there are Arab diplomats serving in foreign countries as ambassadors and as consul generals. Israeli Arabs are strongly represented in Israel's medical system. They make up around 20% of Israel's doctors, 40% of Israel's nurses, and 43% of Israel's pharmacists. Israel's beaches, restaurants, universities, and public areas are places where you'll find many Jewish, Arab, and others intermingling freely. Just take a bus ride in Jerusalem, and Arabs don't have to sit in the back of the bus. Arab and Jewish babies are born in the same exact delivery rooms, while Jews and Arabs travel on the same trains, taxis, and buses. There are no laws mandating segregation in public places and facilities, and the public school system is not segregated. 22% of the undergraduate students at the Technion, which is the Israeli Institute of Technology, are Arabs. Arabs can travel to and live in any community in the country. There are no restrictions in Israeli law against interfaith or inter-ethnic marriages. South African judge Richard Goldstone has observed that, quote, "In Israel, there is no apartheid. Nothing there comes close to the definition of apartheid under the 1998 Rome Statute." Reverend Dr. Kenneth Misho, a member of South Africa's parliament, denounced the accusation that Israel, which guarantees full legal and civil rights for all its citizens, is an apartheid state. He said this ridiculous accusation trivializes the word apartheid. Of course, it should come as no surprise that an organization like Amnesty International recently published an extensive report of 280 pages accusing Israel of establishing a cruel system of apartheid against Palestinian Arabs. The driving force behind such a report is again not to arrive at a true assessment of the situation in Israel. Rather, it is driven by an obsession to smear and delegitimize Israel. There was a critical review of this report by Amnesty International that was put out by NGO Monitor that uncovered nearly 300 flaws in the report and concluded that basically the report by Amnesty International was a production of a modern-day blood libel. Although Israel is clearly not an apartheid state, this does not mean that there is absolutely no de facto discrimination experienced by Arab citizens. It's like saying that you will not find African Americans in North America experiencing segregation and discrimination. Of course, this has not been entirely stamped out almost anywhere in the world. And yet Israel still ranked above Italy, Spain, and the United States in a respected global index of democratic values. The latest edition of the annual Democracy Index from the prestigious Economist Intelligence Unit rated Israel at 7.97 out of 10, just behind France at 7.99 and Britain at 8.1 points. So encountering the onslaught of lies about Israel can be demoralizing, and sometimes the accusations can sound plausible and reasonable, especially when, in big lie fashion, it is repeated endlessly. When this happens, we have to bear in mind the aphorism of King Solomon in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 17, where he says, "The first to present their case can seem correct until their fellow comes and cross-examines." So when Israel has a chance to present its side of the story, it will emerge victorious in the eyes of those willing to weigh the evidence.